Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, where I have with me returning guest for the second time, Joseph Duis from Heresy Studios. So, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am very excited because it's been about 3-4 months since we last spoke, and we're going to be talking a lot about your current Kickstarter that's happening, the Crusade of Dracula. But I do want to catch everybody up on Heresy Studios and what type of comics you produced for those who didn't catch our first interview. And I know there's things like Dr. Orange and the Order of Dracula and Bless the Children, as well as Super Heresies and a few other books. I think the Advocator, I think it's the Advocator, and there's a few of those, and I'm sure you're going to correct me. So, what is Heresy Studios for those who don't know, and what are some of those titles before we really dive into Crusades of Dracula and what all that is about?
Heresy Studios is my publishing company, and the books are written by me and lettered by me. And we have a bunch of different light artists and colorists. First book was The Order of Dracula, which was a story about an Irish separatist who allies with Dracula at the turn of the 20th century for political reasons. Crusade of Dracula is the sequel to that. And then we had Bless the Children, which was a horror Western comic. And then Super Heresies was our superhero, public domain superhero comic. And then we have Dr. Orange, which is our psychological horror comic. We had Two Eyed Tales, which is a collection of black and white horror comics. I've also had stories and anthologies from other publishers like The Advocator Presents and Nerd Nation Presents. So this new book is the first sort of book we have that's a mini series. It is not standalone like the others.
Yeah, and let's get into it and talk about it because it's sort of a sequel to Order of Dracula, but you don't have to read Order of Dracula to
Yeah,
get off it. There's some of the same characters. Dracula hasn't changed, obviously. And
yeah.
then there's another main character, and I believe his name is James Fitzharris, and he's in it. So us just talk a little bit about Order of Dracula to catch everybody up on speed, because that obviously deals with an Irish separatist, and I think it takes place like 12 or 14 years before Crusade of Dracula takes place.
Yeah.
And so just catch everybody up on everything they need to know about Order of Dracula to read Crusades of Dracula, if at all
Uh,
they need to know anything.
yeah, Order of Dracula. There was an Irish separatist, James Fitzharris, who was involved in a political assassination in the 1880s, and he goes to jail. And Dracula arranges for him to get out of jail in exchange for help with a goal that he has not defined. So Dracula will be helping him with the Irish separatist movement, and he will be helping Dracula. Of course, we don't find out until Crusade of Dracula that his goal is to collapse the Ottoman Empire.
So let's talk about that. So now we have the Crusade of Dracula. So Order of Dracula is a one shot, and there's one version of it, and then it's been remastered, and then we're now on to Crusades of Dracula. So it takes place about 16 years after Order of Dracula, and Dracula's got sort of a revenge idea to take down the Ottoman Empire. He doesn't like them. World War II is happening because this thing takes place in 1918, sort of in the middle of World War One, and so a lot of stuff is occurring in Europe, and so obviously, and the Allies are sort of on Dracula's side, but they're not. And then there's an issue of the Arab world sort of saying and wanting to take over, and then declaring it somewhat of a holy war. And so, where did this idea even come from? Because you got a lot of moving parts, and it can go in a million different directions.
Yeah. So I really wanted to make Dracula seem I had this idea of the undead sort of maturing intellectually after death, but not emotionally. So undead sort of in literature kind of represent the influence of the past and the present, and so I had this idea that Dracula sort of never really got over what happened to him in life, and while he's been able to make new allies and make new plans, and the way we portray him is the way he really was in life, which is his approach to everything is social. So he just decides he's going to get everybody else to do his dirty work for him. And so we don't really emphasize his like supernatural powers. He does have some, but they're left intentionally vague because he's created an entire disinformation campaign about what his capabilities really are. And they're pretty much obviously not the typical ones. We see him go out during the daylight. We can see him get injured, even though he heals later. But yeah, so the idea was, in life he really made these enemies of the Ottoman Empire because he was kidnapped by them when he was 12 years old, and it just got worse from there. And we actually used the entire true story of his dealings with the Ottoman Empire, and we show that in the 15th century over the course of the first 2 issues of the miniseries. And so the idea of setting it during World War I is because the Ottoman Empire had been declining for a while, and the Ottoman Empire was officially over as of 1923. But losing the war was just a really, really terrible setback for them.
Yeah, and to even talk about that, because obviously I don't think vampires are real, and maybe I'm mistaken here. I could very well be wrong on the topic, but obviously this is very much the idea that I don't want to say alternative history, but we're inserting, Dracula, and we're inserting this mystical creature, in the Ottoman Empire obviously has their own mystical creature sort of to match Dracula, and I don't think that that's a secret or me spoiling anything, where that's kind of his goal, to take out this mystical creature that sort of seems to be a centerpiece of the Ottoman Empire and their expansion, and ultimately their decline is sort of ensued out of that. I think it's pretty clear where the framework of all of this. And so what is that like? Because you're not necessarily rewriting history, you're just inserting components into history, but you still have to play within the frameworks of history. And so it kind of fits that genre very nicely in many ways. And so what is that like? Because we do have World War One, and I know that the Ottoman Empire did declare it somewhat of a holy war, and it definitely affected going up against Western culture and freedom of speech and democracy and freedom of religion elements. And I don't think the Allied forces viewed it as a holy war, but the Ottoman Empire did in many ways. So what is that like to play with? Because it's very interesting.
Yeah, so I'm I have 2 history degrees. It's pretty much where I come to everything from that direction. So I did a lot of research, and I kind of took mostly 2 books and used that as sort of a framework for the story. The main one for the 20th century story is 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which is by Thomas Edward Lawrence, and that is his firsthand account of the Arab Revolt. So what happened was the Ottoman Emperor, the Ottoman Sultan, called for a holy war, and the Arabs, which were under Ottoman control at the time, they didn't go along with it. They said this is not a legitimate holy war because the Sharif of Mecca, who was the biggest, most influential imam in Arabia, came out against them and said this is not a legitimate religious authority to declare a holy war. And the Arabs never really liked being under Ottoman control. So this sort of kicked off a revolt against the Ottomans. We've all heard of Lawrence of Arabia, and that's kind of what the story is. His framework is it took all the real things that happened to Lawrence when he was on the way to Damascus and kind of inserted supernatural things in there. So there's a lot of events that if Lawrence hadn't been there and hadn't sort of meticulously taken details and taken photographs and all this stuff, we really wouldn't have known much about the Arab Revolt. So I took that and basic concept and kind of thought about what would happen if this was part of Dracula's war against the Ottoman Empire. So there's World War I going on. There's like a main Middle Eastern campaign. There's a European campaign. There's like all this stuff going on, but we kind of focus on what Lawrence called the sideshow of a sideshow, which is the Arab Revolt. There's sort of a main army conflicts going on in Arabia, but the Arabs are kind of there to just just kind of disrupt supply lines, and hopefully, like, and the way Lawrence describes it, it was mostly pretty boring. They never really took on fights unless they were sure they could win. They spent a lot of time hiding from scouts. They blew up a lot of rail lines, and and they did this for 2 years. So this kind of takes that campaign, and we sort of insert into there what this war is really like between Dracula and the Radiant One, who is the supernatural creature that's helping the Ottoman Empire.
And Dracula's sort of lazy, and he likes to, as you stated,
Yeah,
not do his work himself. Because I mean, why get your hands dirty if you could do it? Somebody else could do it for you, right?
Right,
So
exactly. Yeah.
he sort of gets a bunch of people together. He gets James Fitzharris. He gets his estranged son. He gets the Arabian Night storyteller, and I'm not going to get this name right. I'm not even going to pretend. And I'm sure you know the name, and you could say.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to get it right, and there's no way I'm not. He also gets a retired British Royal Army guy named Thatcher Fitzharris, I think, and that's there, and they sort of get a turncoat. And I love how it's described on the Kickstarter: turncoat Ottoman spy, Miriam Mirzaz. I'm not going to get it right, so I've already admitted defeat before. I've even started. So obviously, you're going to correct some of these names. So this is a very unique cast of characters, is really my question. And obviously, we know James very well from the first Dracula book and what happened and his positions and his Irish separatist positions. But we don't know the rest of these characters. And so what was it like bringing back a character from another book of yours? Because people sometimes don't get to do that. And then secondly, getting to have all these interactions between Dracula and them, as well as James and his son, and a variety of other combinations that could play out and that have played out with the book.
Yeah, it was pretty difficult because usually I'm writing things that are pretty short, and so there's not a lot of moving parts. But with this, it was like, in the first one we kind of promised that there was this Order of Dracula. There was Order of the Dragon, and Dracula was behind it, and there was this global network. And these are all secret agents working for Dracula. And they all have their own motivations. They've all made different deals with them. But we didn't really show it. So I figured, like, Crusade of Dracula, like, we're gonna show some of those people, and we show some others that are not really named but kind of in the background. So we're going to show some of that network and kind of like, what those people's motivations are. And because the whole idea behind Order of Dracula was to say, like, Dracula always has these sort of like living non-mind controlled allies. They started out with Renfield back in the original story, but there's always some excuses, like, they're being tortured or they're just crazy or whatever. But I figured, the most powerful motivation is ideology. So let's try to figure out some political reasons for these people to be together. And, as we kind of get on this with a mini series and we develop some of the newer characters like Fakna and Mariam Marengas, we kind of show what their motivations are and how they got involved on this and how loyal are these people really to Dracula and how loyal is Dracula to them.
Yeah, and to talk about that, because clearly everybody has a reason for being there and has a connection to Dracula. And not everybody necessarily has a connection with each other. And everybody's got their own ideas and their own political identity and their own motivations at the same time, which is very human. And I actually like this because I find that this is, real. It's nice to read something that is actually selfish, and these people are selfish to some degree, and it makes it real. And I say that not to sound like a terrible person, but I say it because it is real, and they're all self-interested. And so what is that like to develop that and then get to play that, and then it's not really, it may be in Dracula's best interest in certain circumstances, but in certain other circumstances it is in his best interest. And so that's a really interesting play because we see this a lot in television, this type of story where you have a group of people together and they all have some common goal, but then they all have different common goals at the same time. And sometimes they're pitted against each other, and other stuff happens. So, what is that like to really play off of that and have a blast doing that and building out this type of story? Because it is a very interesting story, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it helped me a lot that Dracula was a real person. James Fitzharris was a real person, but we kind of fictionalized him. And Scheherazade is a pretty well-known fictional character. So you kind of take what's known about them and kind of extrapolate on it. With the newer characters, Fakna, I really wanted to have somebody who was related to James in some way, in a blood way, but didn't necessarily share his ideals and wasn't necessarily part of the movement, but that he had a connection to. And But somebody who also wasn't close to, but sort of felt obligated to, and that was why I introduced him having a son that he hasn't seen in 35 years. So something I think is really interesting about the book is there are no young characters in it. Like Faulkner is the 38 and he's the youngest character in there. Um, so I had that, and then I kind of wanted there were some really impactful female spies during World War I, and I was thinking about having one of those in there, but I decided to make her an Ottoman spy because really at that point it's you have sort of like one of the most duplicitous casts possible. Like saying like, okay, well, I'm an Ottoman spy, but I got captured, but I really was coming to help work with you. So is that really what her real motivation is, or is she still on the side of the Ottomans? And then that creates conflict between James and Faulkner, who have different opinions about whether she can be trusted. So I wrote this whole thing, like the whole 3 issues, all as one story. I decided to split it up, but the characters are who they are and where they are at the beginning of the story because they need to be someplace at the end of the story. So that's why they kind of are all duplicitous. So you don't really know who stands where until the end of the story.
And in many ways, they're also all very much human, in which that, I read stuff, and I think I spoke about it, and I spoke about it with a bunch of your friends, like Chuck, as well as Travis, about where we read a bunch of comic books, and, Batman's not real. Superman is so righteous. And I hate to say this, but people aren't that righteous. People strive to be, but it's nice to read something that's real and that people are self-interested in that. Look, everybody's got somewhat of a deal with Dracula to some degree in this book, but at the same time, they are also willing to break those deals and break those promises. And I think it's a nice touch because it's like, oh, you can now understand and you can relate better to it. Like when I'm reading it and I'm seeing a character break a promise, even though they swore loyalty and allegiance, it's very nice to see that being broken for something else that they want. And so I really like when people do that and when writers do that and artists do that because I think it's real and I think that there's a real change for realness in comics versus having this righteous Superman. And nothing against Superman, everybody. I mean, I love Superman to death, but at a certain point, you need something more than just fluff in your mouth.
And it's a hard balance because I really want to show the characters as having principles, and they all do have principles in some way. It's just a question of like what are they loyal to, and what sort of ideals are they going for? What are their goals, and then what rules are they willing to break to get to those goals?
Yeah, I agree. And then you mentioned something else that's also really fascinating where, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was supposed to be one gigantic story for starters. And then you mentioned this, and I'm super interested in this. So did you script out the entire thing or block it out at first, and then now you're just realizing that, oh shit, I got a big story here and that I can't necessarily afford to publish all of it at once. I'm a realist, everybody, on Kickstarter and everything, And so is that what happened, or did you say, hey, you know what is, maybe I don't want to overburden my artist with like 45 pages and like go into like 144 pages and kill my artist, or what was happening? Or
Yeah.
did you say, hey, I want to test the market also a little bit, like because there's a bunch of reasons why people break stuff up into three parts. Sometimes you have a publisher on the line and then they sandbag you. I had somebody on and that's what happened to them, and then they just decided to go back to Kickstarter and do the entire thing in one shot versus in parts. So I'm just curious how all that came about.
Yeah, it was scripted all at once. It was edited and then edited all at once as one thing.
And now, who's your editor? Who's your editor?
Chuck Pino's my editor.
We can't talk about Chuck. Chuck's just a terrible person.
He has a Kickstarter called Belial #1-2 on Kickstarter right now.
Chuck knows we're joking when I say that. He knows I'm joking. He knows I'm joking. But continue.
So he was my editor, and so we got everything straightened out, and then I started bringing on Greg and Raul as my artists, and one of the reasons I brought them on, aside from the fact that I like their art, is that Raul was our artist on Dr. Orange, and Greg was our artist on Bless the Children and Super Heresy, most of Super Heresy, and a bunch of other stuff we've done. I brought them on because I knew that they wouldn't be intimidated by doing lots of pages, and I knew that they wouldn't be behind schedule. So because if I was going to do this and I was going to split into three, which the main reason I was doing it is because I didn't think I was going to be able to fund it all at once. But another reason I wanted to do it is because at first I was like, okay, maybe I'll do one part, and I was like, maybe I'll do two parts. But then two parts, there's kind of a meta narrative going on in the story about it being a story about storytelling, and that's where the Arabian Nights influence comes in, where the Arabian Nights, where you have nested stories. So you have the whole thing is being told by somebody, but then somebody within the story starts telling a story, and then so you get kind of that sense of it's what's fictional about it and what's real about it. And we do that to some extent. It's not nearly as complicated as the Arabian Nights, but we do have two different narrators for the story, with Dracula and James. And so we're seeing two different perspectives of what's going on. But I thought about that, and I was thinking about, I think we should do three instead of two, because first of all, it's kind of long to be two. It's 108 pages altogether. But second of all, like, if I really wanted to commit to this idea of it being a story about stories, every story is a beginning and a middle. So I split it into three, you're kind of commenting on that, and even at the end of book one, Scheherazade kind of sort of gives a meta commentary on the fact that we have two more chapters, so that's kind of why I did it, and mostly because of the money reason. But I said if I was going to do it in three parts, like, I don't want to stretch it out forever, So we've actually already have about more than 2/3 of the art done for this book too, and like I said, the script's already done and edited. So as soon as we finish all the line art for book two, then I can letter it, and then we can start going on that one too.
Well, the best stories, much like the best wrestling matches in history, are divided into three parts. There's a reason why Shakespeare writes in three parts. Yeah. There's once in the first part in writing, there's a good guy wins, and then the second part, the bad guy's winning, and then in the third part, all hell breaks loose. And when you actually look at wrestling and really good wrestling stories and wrestling matches, it actually follows that parameter, because it works, because you can go one side, then you can go the other, and then it all breaks out in hell in the third chapter. And that's if you look at a Shakespeare play, that's exactly how it works. And sometimes a good guy doesn't win in a Shakespeare's play. I'm just saying, but it does follow that, where at one point, and I have a feeling, I've read chapter one, I have a feeling somewhat something like that is going to be playing out, where one chapter is going to be good and the other is going to be bad. And I don't mean bad as in bad in story, but more bad guy-ish, if you will. I'm just giving everybody a heads up. And that kind of leads me into this, where you already answered part of it. I know that book one is funded. I know that you guys reached your funding, and that you have 13 or 12 or 13 days left. So everybody who's watching is seeing this, whether live or on replay. There is a lot of time to pledge still. I think there's a bunch of rewards that we're going to talk about in a second. But what can people expect? And you kind of tease a little bit, but I don't want to give too much away because I've read it, obviously. And I don't want to ruin anything. And I'm picking my words very carefully on what is going on without spoiling anything. So what can people expect? And then we're going to jump into some reward stuff to entice them.
Well, so we have a main standard edition. There are 2 different covers. And then we have a deluxe edition that has a 3rd cover that includes the script and the commentary pages and the story. So the deluxe edition for this is actually the longest one we've done because the script is so long. The script is almost 80 pages, and so there's a lot of. I ended up doing like a reference section at the beginning of the script, so there's like a ton of stuff in the script, and I actually had to black some stuff out of the script because it was spoilers for the 2nd and 3rd one.
You had to go 0 dark 30 on that.
Yeah, yeah. So those are the main things. I try to keep it simple. So we have digital edition, we have print edition, we have theme song, which we started doing those over time, and then there's a draw-in level where you can be drawn in as one of Dracula's army in the 15th century. And then there's one tier that had original art pages. The tier is all gone now, though. And then we also have just all of our previous books that we've contributed to or published. And then we also have milestone rewards. So right now, everybody's getting 6 free indie comic PDFs. And then our next milestone adds 2 more. So I decided just to kind of stick with the milestones instead of doing something really complicated. So we just have backer milestones. The Super Heresies, we did something that was like, we raise this amount of money, this amount of time. The people who back before then get it, and other people don't. And it was like, it was really complicated. So
let's talk about some of that.
Everything, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about some of that. So there's a few things going on here. So one of the things that I see in a lot of Facebook groups, and I've been asking a lot of people in the Kickstarter realm, is what do you prioritize? Because I know that you have a bunch of digital rewards, and they're relatively cheap. And obviously, we're going to talk about COVID in a minute here, but I definitely want to stay on this topic where I've seen a divide, where some people love and fight digital, and some people say if you're not doing digital, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. But also some people say, hey, I want to prioritize physical rewards. And obviously, COVID has changed certain things. I don't know if you know this, but I still think you can't ship into Argentina. I don't know if you have a big following in Argentina, but I think it speaks to the volume that there are countries in the world where you can't ship to. They will legitimately not accept a package from outside of their country, which and I don't think it's going to get much better in the next 6 months or a year. And I don't want to get too political on that, where I don't think that's not a topic I want to dive into because that's not what we're talking about. But obviously, it changes the dynamic of who can get what on a physical level. And so I'm curious how you view digital, and if you've had a change of heart on it, or what you prioritize on Kickstarter, because there is a lot of people who disagree on all this, and I actually like your digital rewards a lot more than your physical rewards, because I'm the type of person that there's a lot of Kickstarter projects that happen, and I don't know if I believe enough to go and spend $15 on a physical copy, but I could spend $5 and take the risk, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, our first Kickstarter we did was a digital only Kickstarter, because I wanted to start kind of small. But I think not doing both is really a mistake. And actually, one thing that I try to do is I try to have digital tiers other than just the standard PDF tier, because I actually have heard from people who said, I only want the digital, but I want to spend more money. So I say, okay, well, I'll make some more tiers. So we always have
That's a new thing too.
Yeah,
That's a
so we
new
only
thing
have
too.
we have like 3 or 4 different digital tiers, and you can.
Especially when you have a studio. You know Casey Bowker and Ruben Romero. I'm sure that you've heard their name, where they have a lot of comics under their belts, and they both have different comics and comics together. And so people obviously want other things that they've done beyond that Kickstarter they're working on. And obviously, you have an entire studio worth of other stuff. And so for you, it makes 100% sense, especially when you get to that level. And I just want to commend you on that, where offering, several things and offering and a bunch of stuff's just slipping my head, but obviously offering Order of Dracula and offering the Crusade at the same time is super helpful because people want to read both of those things or copies to other things that you've done or other anthologies you've been a part of. It's super important because people want that stuff too, and they also want it somewhat a little bit cheaper than if they were buying it directly from your store.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I'm always kind of hesitant about like how many tiers I'm going to have, because people say you have too many tiers and people get confused. But there's always somebody who wants like all the comics. Like I just had a guy who picked like the entire print collection, and he was also international. So it was like so he's paying like
It
40
made
bucks to
sense
get
for him though, in
yeah,
many ways, because he bought big on an international shipping position, which costs more money.
yeah,
And so there's always somebody like out there who
yeah.
wants that stuff, and obviously they're gonna go spend big money to achieve that, and for them it's perfect.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, when I back Kickstarters, I almost always just get it like a basic digital level, because I try not to buy physical comics anymore because they're taking over my house. So uh,
Oh, I'm
so I just
back up.
decided like I just decided like I like very rarely do I get a physical copy. But yeah, so me being a mostly digital backer, like I try to I try to make sure the digital people, whether it's because they're international or they just don't want to get the physical comic, um, make sure they have something there and not just like a basic digital tier. At the same time, there's a lot of people who want print comics, so gotta make sure I do that too. It's definitely harder to fulfill, but uh, but like there's people who are just like, I'm not going to read digital comic, which I completely understand, because if I had a choice, I probably would just read print comics. It's kind of easier to take with me, um, read wherever. Um, but yeah, it's just I've had people message me like, are there digital tiers? Who just didn't look at the tiers and who just wanted to be like, I want to make sure there's digital tiers. I'll say, yeah, we have like 3 or 4 digital tiers. And then the back it. So I think definitely you need both, because there's people who want both. I've seen kind of a back and forth between what the percentage is. I usually have a good percentage of a digital only, probably about 40 to 50%. But it may be COVID related, but the last one I had almost 60%, I think. So I guess it can go back and forth depending on the project.
Yeah, and then the other side of this entire digital thing is that you have unlocked goals with, I'm not sure if it's money related or backer related. And I know that a lot of people have been doing that. That's sort of a new thing. I think since COVID started that I remember, where I don't know who started it, but what I do know is that a lot of people have jumped on. Travis Gibb has jumped onto it. I think Russell Nolte has jumped in on it. I don't know who else, but a lot of people have. I think Chuck has jumped in on it to some degree, and so obviously these are a lot of first issues, a lot of stuff like that, and it's good for you because obviously whoever backs it gets a bunch of comics that they
Yeah.
that are not you, but make you look good, make the other people look good. It spreads a lot of love around. Is a good way. It's a good cross promotion tool for everybody. It's a good way to introduce people to people that I might not know or you might not know or your
Yeah.
backers might not know. And I think there's room for everybody in Kickstarter right now. So what is that like to be part of that community? Because it is a very much a community
Yeah.
solidifier, I believe, in the
Yeah.
Kickstarter world.
I mean, I've probably done a better job networking with this Kickstarter than I have in previous ones, um, just because it's probably just more necessary. There's a lot of projects on Kickstarter right now.
We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. I promise.
Yeah, so a lot of the normal things aren't working. But yeah, I think just being part of the community, somebody from the community who might back your stuff, who has their own following, maybe whoever's following them on Kickstarter might back yours, or you advertise somebody in an update, man, you can get backers from that. So just being part of the community, and everybody kind of helps each other out. That's we're stronger together than trying to work separately.
And let's talk about the unnormalacy of Kickstarter, because Kickstarter has gotten, I don't want to say weird, but it's definitely become corporate, and it's taken a corporate left turn. And I don't know if the complete corporate left turn is out of it, or if it's going to be we're going serpentine in the corporate realm of all of this, because Keanu Reeves came in, Charles Soule's come in heavy with curse words, and I back that project. I'm upfront about it. Scott Snyder came in. Ryan Brown's been around. Todd McFarlane and his toy, even though it's not comic, it's comic related, not comic book ish, because that was in the toy department, and that did, I think, $5 million. And so obviously, and there's other projects on Kickstarter that have done millions of dollars, not in the comic world. I just want to make that clear. But what is that like? Because that's definitely taken it and spun it around and has reimagined Kickstarter in a variety of ways. I mean, Keanu Reeves did I think they did $1 million, or pretty close to $1 million.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know that Scott
Yeah.
did almost 300,000, or close to it, like 250 to 300,000. So obviously, and I know the opinion, it's really 50-50, because it is a double-edged sword. And I'm the first person to believe that Kickstarter is for everybody, and that
Yeah.
there is no gatekeeper per se. But at the
Yeah.
same time, we have to acknowledge that there is issues with it, and it does change the game. So I'm curious how you feel about that, and how it affects you, and your position on it. And it's a bit controversial, I know.
Yeah, I've kind of seen both sides of it, because last time it launched was in May to early June, and at that time, the Kickstarter projects had dropped 60% of what they normally were for comics, because of COVID. So people were kind of waiting to launch stuff, and then now it's a complete opposite, where you got double the number of projects as you normally have. You've got obviously these celebrity campaigns in the recent future. So we saw in May and June, I launched it and completely overestimated how much time I'd be able to spend on it. My kids had gotten out of school 2 days, I think, before we launched. And so the entire 2 weeks, we had a small goal. So I was like, we can probably do this, but the entire 2 weeks, I did almost nothing on that Kickstarter. I was extremely lucky, and the reason I was lucky is because there weren't that many projects. So I had a bunch of people come who just kind of saw the project on Kickstarter and backed it, and that's never happened before. So it was really unusual. And then this time, it's almost like complete opposite. Like you go back to kind of the feeling that you're kind of pulling teeth the whole time, but this time it takes more effort. It takes more effort to pull teeth than it did before. So
let me ask the question, because I'm curious, because obviously you just had two very different Kickstarter experiences in this new thing, and I want to say it's almost like, I know that certain people have Kickstarter classes, and I don't know if I think it's Tyler or James's class, and I don't know if you're part of his community, but what is the consensus in the Kickstarter community? I know Chuck, you're friends with Chuck, you're friends with Travis, and a few others. And so what is the consensus? Because I'm a spectator, and I'm seeing it, and I'm having the problem of choosing which project I back. I'm committing about $15 a month, and I'm trying to say, hey, who do I back? What's interesting? And I look at like 15 browsers, and I'm like, oh my God, like all this stuff looks interesting. But I'm also saying, like, are half of these even going to be funded at the same time? Because I don't want to, and it's not me losing my money, it's the fact that if I choose X and it's not funded, every other project is now done, and so it's a missed opportunity. It's like it's a weird situation as a
Yeah.
consumer for me, and I'm not the creator, and I've never run a Kickstarter, I've never crowdfunded in my life, and so I'm in a very different bubble than everybody else because I'm the consumer versus
Yeah.
the creator. And so I'm just curious what the consensus is among creators with all this.
I mean, Adam, I'm not sure what the consensus is, honestly. There seem to be different opinions on it. I think, the one piece of advice that I can give, I feel confident giving on Kickstarter, is that you don't have to be a magus. You don't have to be a guru on Kickstarter in order to succeed. And I'm not. If you're on there and you're like me and you've done a bunch of previous projects, so that helps. And you have a relatively low goal. Like we had a fairly low goal. I mean, this was our highest goal we ever had for this project, but we've never really done like a 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000. So I think if you're like me, you have some pre-existing audience, you don't have a ridiculous goal. You maybe don't know all the tricks, but I think that's probably going to be okay, because you don't need to have 500 backers, but I think, and of course, if you're a celebrity, or you're like a household name in the comics community, it probably is fairly easy for you. But I think maybe in the middle is where there's some trouble, where you have sort of a semi-high goal, but you're not necessarily a household name. It would be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, and to even talk about that, because to even go off of that, and I do want to start talking about promoting yourself here because I know you got a hard deadline. Where can people find you, and where can people support this comic and all that stuff? Because I think that's a really good place for us to start ending. Is where can people find this project? How do they find it? How much time is left on it? And where are you at in funding? Because I know I said it's funded, and I know that this book is happening, but where's the best place to support it and everything that's going on with it?
Yeah, our Kickstarter page is at www.theorderofdracula.com. So that's the page we're going to use for the books 2 and 3, as well as the same one we use for Remastered. So every time we do a new Kickstarter, just keep the same redirect URL. So that's theorderofdracula.com. Our website is at heresystudiosllc.com. We have a Facebook page, Heresy Studios LLC. We also have an Order of Dracula page on Facebook. I have a Twitter that's Heresy Studios LL, and then I have a Instagram. It's Heresy Studios LLC Comics.
Yeah, I'm just finding the link, everybody, so you can easily access it. I'm just throwing it up right here. So right here, it should be up there in a minute for everybody who wants to back it. Seriously, go back it. It's looking like a cool project. It's in black and white, which is also cool. And black and white comics are always fun, in my opinion. And I'm excited to see where book 2 goes. Obviously, you said, just to sell it even further, that book 2 and book 3 are scripted, and the art for book 2 is, I think you said, 2/3 done at this point.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's going to be finished quicker. And just to reconfirm also, because I know on Kickstarter people sometimes don't know how to deliver projects. Really, most of the artwork is done on book 1, if not all of it's done. And so this is just ready to be printed and digitally polished up and all that stuff, and all like the final bells and whistles for people who are concerned on Kickstarter about that. And I know it's still a concern. And so correct me if I'm wrong on any of that.
Yeah. Book 1 is completely done. We're just kind of waiting to see who wants to be drawn in, and we'll draw them in. It's already been lettered, and it's all done. It's all laid out.
So that's good to know. That's actually really good. Sorry for interrupting, but most people do a draw-in for the next book. That reward is for this book. That's fascinating. So obviously, everybody go buy that. Go check it out. Definitely support it. It's on Kickstarter. It's right in the description. It's right in the feed at the moment. I just added it to the feed. It's in the comment section down below. Seriously, support indie comics. I've been saying it all along. that you have to support indie comics. You got to support Heresy Studios and everything they do. Check out their shop, check out the Kickstarter. 12 days to go. Definitely be supportive, because obviously without fan support, a lot of this stuff falls apart. And if you got an extra few dollars, throw it at this campaign, because I really enjoyed the book. I thought the book was fascinating, and it's enjoyable, and I'm excited to see where book 2 and book 3 go. And I think it's going to be really interesting what happens with all the characters. And I'm not going to ruin too much here for anybody checking that stuff out. But also, going beyond just money. At this stage in the game and society and everything that's going on, money is not enough support anymore. You have to support people on social media. You have to follow Facebook pages. You have to follow them on Twitter, support Instagrams. It's also not just Joe anymore. It's supporting Joe. It's also supporting the artists and the team that worked on it. Go bother Chuck Pino. Chuck loves to be bothered. Go bother him, please. He's a terrible person. Go bother him. No, he's like one of the best editors on the planet. And he's probably one of the best unsigned editors on the planet. And he knows I'm joking with him very much. He knows it. So when he sees this, he knows that Chuck, we were meant to be together, but it would never work out between us, I'm on the East Coast and you're in Texas. It just won't work out. It's just one of those things. But I love you, Chuck, nonetheless. But anyhow, in all seriousness, though, seriously, go support on social media, because it's super important. And if you can't afford to back a Kickstarter, because I've been saying it again and again and again, that it's not just money. And if you can't afford to back, because things are tight, things are crazy in the United States, by definition. Without getting too political, I think it's a pretty safe bet to state that at the moment. And you're concerned about money, because we're going into a complicated time right now. There's no excuse, unless you don't have electricity or internet, not to support somebody on social media. It is super crucial to do that. And so I really encourage everybody to go check out, share the Kickstarter, share Facebook pages, like Facebook pages, engage on them. And no more likes, guys. It's hearts that are super important as well, because hearts are actually more important than likes with Facebook algorithm. So definitely give hearts, not likes, in that regard. And so I would just like to say thank you for being on again for a second time. Obviously, we're probably going to do this for book 2 when book 2 comes out. Hopefully, if I didn't mess this up too badly, we're going to do for book 2. So, because I'm excited to see where this story goes. And I like the fact that it's 3. And so, final words from you. I'm going to let you have the final word.
You know what? I have an exclusive right here for you. I got the proof copy in of the comic. So,
exclusive time.
So it looks like nothing that has been published in the past 100 years. Like it's square. So it's 8.5 by 8.5. So it looks like it was published in 1918 or 1919. So that's kind of what I wanted to do with it. And the pages are all square, and all the art's square. So I told my artist, I was like, yeah, let's make it square. They're like, what are you talking about? But I was like, yeah, but it's 8.5, 8.5. You have more space, So that was like my pitch for that. But anyway, all right. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, yeah. No. Thank you for being on. And again, obviously we did one interview a while back. This is our second interview. And I'm just happy to interview you anytime. And obviously that's a wrap, everybody. So definitely go check it out. Check out the book. You can get the square copy, guys. It's going old school comics. Old school comics, everybody. Square copy. So that's a wrap.
Yeah.